Sofia Reyes had waited tables at the Blue Plate Diner for 5 years, long enough that she could read a table's entire emotional temperature before the first order ever left her notepad. She'd learned that particular skill young, watching her mother work 3 service jobs at once just to keep their small apartment's lights on, watching customers talk over her mother's head like she was simply part of the furniture that happened to bring their coffee. Sofia had promised herself somewhere around 15 that she'd never let a table make her feel that small, and 5 years into diner work, she'd built an entire quiet discipline around that promise. Polite, efficient, invisible exactly as much as she needed to be and not 1 inch further. She liked the job precisely because it asked nothing of her emotionally. Refill the water, take the order, read the table's mood well enough to know whether they wanted conversation or silence, and go home at the end of the shift with cash in her pocket and her half-finished accounting degree quietly, stubbornly still alive on the side, 1 night class at a time. It wasn't a glamorous life. It was hers, built carefully, and she'd stopped needing it to be more than that. The corner booth on a Thursday evening held exactly the kind of table Sofia clocked as trouble before she'd even approached with menus. A man in an expensive dark suit, posture too controlled to be relaxed, and a woman across from him working entirely too hard at charm that didn't quite land. "Can I get you 2 started with something to drink?" Sofia asked, setting down 2 waters with the same practiced, unhurried rhythm she brought to every table. "Wine list if you have one," the woman said, her voice pitched for warmth that didn't quite reach her eyes. "And whatever the gentleman's having." The man, Sofia would learn his name, was Enzo Marchetti before the night was over, though right now he was simply table 12, restless and counting minutes, barely glanced at the wine list. He had one hand resting near his jacket in the specific unconscious posture of someone already planning his exit, and Sofia recognized that particular towel too, the same one she'd watched 100 bad first dates wear before finally excusing themselves to the bathroom and never coming back. "Just the water's fine for me," Enzo said, his attention already drifting somewhere past his date's shoulder. The woman, whose easy laugh Sofia noted felt rehearsed rather than natural, launched into a story about how she'd happened to be free that particular night, the specific over-explained convenience of someone who'd prepared the story before she needed it. Sofia moved off to check her other tables, though something about the woman's face nagged at her, familiar in a way she couldn't immediately place. It came to her while she was refilling a coffee 2 tables over. The hostess stand. A restaurant 2 blocks from the diner, the kind of upscale place Sofia had never actually eaten at but walked past constantly, the kind with a rotating cast of hostesses who all seemed to look interchangeably polished. This woman had worked there. Sofia was certain of it, the specific memory of walking past that window most evenings on her way home, watching the same face greet arriving guests. She almost let it go. It wasn't her business, it wasn't her table's problem to solve. And diners who tried to insert themselves into customers' personal lives rarely ended the night with a decent tip. But something about the man's tired, checked-out posture, the specific loneliness of someone sitting across from a story he clearly didn't believe, made her pause when she returned to refill his water. "Sorry," Sofia said, setting the pitcher down, the words arriving almost before she decided to say them. "I don't mean to interrupt. You just look familiar," she added, glancing at the woman. "Weren't you hostessing over at Lucien's on Ashford? 2 blocks from here." The woman's easy composure flickered just barely a half-second too long before she recovered with a bright, dismissive laugh. "Oh gosh, I get that a lot. I've never worked there, but I hear it's lovely." Sofia shrugged, already moving on to her next table. "My mistake. You've got one of those faces, I guess." She didn't think much more about it, refilling water at table 6. Until she glanced back and noticed Enzo Marchetti watching her retreat with an entirely new kind of attention. Sharp, focused, considerably more awake than he'd looked all evening. Camille Voss excused herself to the restroom 2 minutes later, her composure just visibly rattled enough that Sofia, clearing a nearby table, caught the tight, controlled pace of her exit. Enzo waited until she'd fully disappeared before catching Sofia's eye and gesturing her over. A small, deliberate motion that carried none of his earlier distracted restlessness. "What you said," he asked, voice low, "about the hostess stand. Say that again." "Exactly." Sofia hesitated, the old, careful instinct of a woman who'd learned young not to insert herself into things above her pay grade warring against the specific, sharp focus in his expression. "I probably shouldn't have said anything. It's not really my business." "It's my business," Enzo said, and something in the plain, direct weight of the sentence made Sofia decide, against every instinct telling her to stay quiet, that this particular table warranted an actual answer. I walk past Lucine most nights on my way home, she said. I'm almost positive she worked the hostess stand there. I remember specifically because she used to wear this green dress, and stood out against everyone else's black uniforms. She stopped being there a while back. I noticed because I'm the kind of person who notices when a routine changes, even a small one. How long ago? Enzo asked, urgency sharpening beneath his controlled voice. Sofia thought back, working the timeline loose the way she worked every detail she'd ever half noticed without meaning to. A couple of months, maybe. Bring some time. I remember because it was right around when they redid the restaurant's awning, and I thought it was strange she left right before they finished the renovation, when most people would have waited to see the new look. Enzo went very still, something calculating and considerably darker moving behind his composed expression. Spring. You're sure? Pretty sure, Sofia said, growing wary now, unsure if she'd just made a genuine mistake by speaking up at all. Why does it matter? I don't even know your name. Enzo, he said, offering it plainly, no longer distracted, no longer counting minutes toward an exit. And it matters because my family had a warehouse lease fall apart under considerably strange pressure this past spring, around the exact same time you're describing. I'd like to understand if that's actually a coincidence, or if it's something considerably less innocent. Sofia absorbed the specific uncomfortable weight of having accidentally stumbled into something larger than a bad blind date settling into her chest. I don't know anything about warehouses or leases. I just know what I remember seeing from the sidewalk most evenings. That's exactly what I need, Enzo said. Specific, unbiased memory. Not theory. Not speculation. You're not trying to tell me a story the way she's been doing all night. You just noticed something true. Camille returned from the restroom before Sofia could answer further, her earlier rattled composure fully rebuilt, warm and easy in a way that carried the specific practiced smoothness of someone recovering ground she understood she'd just lost. Sorry about that, she said, sliding back into the booth with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. Where were we? Sofia retreated toward the kitchen, watching from a careful distance as Enzo settled back into his seat, giving Camille nothing away in his expression, though Sofia noticed. Because noticing was the one skill 5 years of diner work had sharpened into something considerably more useful than she'd ever expected, that his attention had shifted permanently. He was no longer counting minutes toward an exit. He was watching Camille now with the specific, careful focus of a man gathering evidence rather than making conversation. He didn't order dessert. When the check came, he left considerably more than the meal warranted, along with a business card tucked under Sofia's portion. No note, just a name and a number and the specific quiet weight of an unspoken request. Sofia watched them leave together, Camille's hand tucked into the crook of Enzo's arm with practiced ease, and felt a small, uneasy knot settle in her stomach that had nothing to do with the generous tip. Enzo's assistant pulled Camille Voss's employment history the following morning, the specific, methodical efficiency of a man who trusted verification over assumption, no matter how compelling a single overheard sentence at a diner had sounded the night before. You were right to ask, the assistant reported, spreading printed documentation across Enzo's desk with visible, professional satisfaction. 6-week employment gap, exactly where the waitress placed it. Officially listed as a leave of absence from a prior position, but the employer on record before that gap is a shell company. The registered address traces back through 2 layers of holding structure to the Volkov family. Enzo felt something cold and certain settle into his chest, the specific grim confirmation of a suspicion he'd rather have proven wrong. The Volkovs. Our closest rivals, arranging my own uncle's business courtesy blind date. It's circumstantial, the assistant cautioned. The shell company connection is real, but proving Camille herself knew who she actually worked for, rather than simply being an employee with no awareness of the ownership structure above her. That's a considerably harder case to build. I don't need a courtroom case yet, Enzo said. I need to understand exactly what she's actually doing in my life, and why my uncle's business courtesy happened to introduce me to a woman with this particular history. He thought of Sofia Riz, standing at his table with a pitcher of water and one plainly delivered sentence that had unraveled in a matter of seconds. A story Camille had clearly spent considerable effort constructing. He hadn't planned to call the number on her order pad. He found himself 3 days later dialing it anyway. The call that followed carried none of his usual careful, controlled authority, replaced instead by the specific awkward uncertainty of a man unaccustomed to needing help from someone entirely outside his world. "I need to ask you something," he said once Sofia had confirmed it was actually her on the line, "and I understand if the answer's no. I need someone who notices details the way you noticed Camille's face. Someone who can move through ordinary places without drawing attention, the way waitstaff naturally do." "I'm not a private investigator," Sofia said, wary and direct. "I'm a waitress with an accounting degree I haven't finished yet. I don't know what you actually think I can do for you." "I think you already did something for me," Enzo said. One sentence delivered like small talk, and it confirmed a suspicion I couldn't have proven without you. "I'm not asking you to do anything dangerous. I'm asking if you'd be willing to help me understand a pattern, using exactly the skill you already have." Sofia sat with the offer for a long moment, old caution warring against something she hadn't fully examined in years: the specific quiet exhaustion of being consistently underestimated by everyone who ever looked at her, assumed her ambitions ended at carrying trays, and moved on without a second thought. "I need to think about it," she said finally. The decision was made for her 3 days later, when a man she didn't recognize sat down at her section during a slow Tuesday afternoon shift, ordering coffee he clearly had no intention of drinking, asking careful, probing questions about the gentleman from dinner, with a politeness that carried unmistakable, threatening undertones beneath it. Sofia felt her pulse spike, old instinct sharpening into focused, controlled alertness. She gave him nothing, vague, unhelpful answers delivered with the same practiced, unremarkable efficiency she brought to every difficult table. But the moment he left without paying for his untouched coffee, she understood with cold, immediate certainty that Camille's people already knew she'd talked. She called Enzo's number that same evening, hands not quite steady. "He knew exactly what to ask," Sofia said, pacing her small apartment with the phone pressed tight against her ear, adrenaline from the afternoon's encounter still running hot beneath her skin. "Not vague questions. Specific ones. What did I tell the gentleman from dinner? That's not someone fishing randomly, Enzo. That's someone who already knows I said something specific and wants to understand exactly how much damage I've done." "I'm sorry," Enzo said, and the genuine, unguarded weight of the apology surprised her, carrying none of the careful transactional distance she'd braced herself to expect from a man in his position. "I should have anticipated that reaching out to you might expose you to exactly this kind of risk. I didn't think it through carefully enough." "I'm the one who spoke up first," Sofia said, though her voice carried more fear than she wanted it to. "I don't regret that. I just didn't expect it to follow me home." "It won't happen again," Enzo said, the promise settling with a weight that carried genuine, immediate resolve rather than empty reassurance. "I'm putting protection around the diner, around your apartment, effective tonight. Not because I'm asking anything more of you. Because you're already exposed, whether you decide to help me further or not, and I'm not willing to let that exposure go unaddressed." Sofia sat with that old wariness warring against the specific, unfamiliar relief of someone actually taking her safety seriously without expecting anything transactional in return. "If I help you," she said slowly, testing the shape of a decision she hadn't fully made yet, "I need to understand what I'm actually walking into. Not just one sentence at a dinner table. What does Camille's family actually want from you? And what happens to me if this goes considerably worse than a stranger asking careful questions over untouched coffee?" "I don't fully know yet what they want," Enzo admitted, the honesty costing him visible effort even through the phone. "I know the warehouse lease collapse cost my family real money and real standing. I know Camille's employment history connects to the Volkovs, our closest rivals. I know my uncle arranged this date as a business courtesy, which means either he was deceived about who Camille actually is or he wasn't, and that's a considerably more dangerous possibility I'm not ready to fully examine yet." "That's a lot of things you don't know," Sofia said, though her voice carried less accusation than genuine, working assessment of the actual risk. "It is," Enzo agreed. "Which is exactly why I need someone who can move unnoticed, the way you always have, gathering the kind of detail that never survives a formal investigation because people don't think to hide themselves from a waitress the way they'd hide from an obvious threat." Sofia turned that over, old exhaustion at being consistently underestimated finally finding a considerably different use than simple resentment. I'm tired of being the person nobody thinks to watch, she said slowly. I've spent 5 years reading rooms nobody thought I was paying attention to. If that skill's actually worth something to you, I want to use it properly. Not as a favor. As a partnership with actual say in what I'm asked to do. That's exactly what I'm offering, Enzo said. Not a transaction. A partnership built around what you actually know how to do. It was a decision that couldn't be walked back once made. Sofia choosing to step deliberately into a conflict considerably larger than the ordinary, careful life she'd built around her diner job and her half-finished degree, Enzo committing to protecting someone whose only connection to his world was a single, honest observation at a dinner table. Then tell me what you actually need, Sofia said, and I'll tell you if it's something I can actually do. Camille sensed the ground shifting beneath her engineered romance faster than either Sofia or Enzo had anticipated, and her response carried none of the retreat either had hoped for. She's moving up the timeline, Enzo's assistant reported, urgency tight in his voice as he delivered news that complicated the careful, methodical investigation considerably. Camille's arranging a public event. An engagement announcement timed for this weekend, photographers already booked. She's trying to lock in the narrative before we can build anything solid enough to counter it. Enzo absorbed the news with controlled fury, the specific mounting pressure of watching a manufactured relationship threaten to become publicly, permanently real before he'd gathered enough proof to stop it cleanly. She's forcing my hand. If I refuse to attend, it looks like I'm confirming rumors my family's rivals would love to spread. Instability, infidelity, whatever story serves them best once the engagement collapses publicly instead of quietly. Sofia, present for the strategy session at Enzo's explicit invitation, worked through the compounding pressure with the same careful, methodical attention she brought to reading a difficult table. If you refuse the event, she wins by default. If you attend without proof solid enough to counter her narrative in the moment, she locks in the engagement story regardless, and you spend months untangling it afterward instead of ending it cleanly now. Then we need the proof finished before Saturday, Enzo said, the timeline landing with genuine mounting weight. Not circumstantial. Documented, undeniable, ready to present in front of the exact witnesses Camille's counting on to make this narrative stick. Every part of the fragile investigation now faced compounding pressure. Enzo's lawyers racing to formally trace the shell company's ownership structure back to the Volkov family with documentation solid enough to survive public scrutiny. Sofia, working her diner shifts while quietly gathering additional detail about Camille's movements, the specific danger of her continued involvement growing sharper with each passing day. I found something, Sofia said 2 days before the planned event, meeting Enzo in the same corner booth where this entire ordeal had first begun. A co-worker from Lucien's, someone I used to chat with when I'd walk past. He still works there. I asked her, careful not pushing too hard, whether she remembered Camille. She did. Said Camille left suddenly, no notice, and that management seemed relieved rather than upset about it, like they'd been waiting for an excuse. That's consistent with someone placed there deliberately rather than genuinely employed, Enzo said, cataloging the detail with focused, growing certainty. Placed to gather information, then pulled the moment the warehouse lease pressure campaign succeeded. There's more, Sofia continued. She mentioned Camille used to take calls in the back office, private ones, always stepping away from the hostess stand at the same time every evening. My friend thought it was strange at the time, just chalked it up to a boyfriend or family drama. Now it sounds considerably less innocent. Enzo's lawyer, working parallel to Sofia's careful informal information gathering, delivered the formal confirmation the following afternoon. Bank records tracing the shell company's payments directly to accounts controlled by the Volkov family's known financial structure, dated precisely across the same window as Camille's employment and departure from Lucien's. This is enough, the lawyer said, spreading the documentation across Enzo's desk with visible, professional satisfaction. Combined with the employment timeline, this isn't circumstantial anymore. This is a documented pattern. The greatest setback arrived that same evening, delivered through a call that confirmed exactly how far Camille's people were willing to escalate to protect the engagement narrative. Word had reached Enzo's uncle, the same relative who'd arranged the original blind date as a business courtesy, that rumors were already spreading about Enzo's instability and public humiliation of a devoted woman, timed precisely to undermine his credibility before he could present any counter-evidence at all. Enzo found his uncle in the estate's private study the following morning, the older man's expression carrying genuine, uncomfortable concern that Enzo understood immediately hadn't originated from malice, only from being fed a narrative considerably ahead of the actual truth. "I'm hearing troubling things," his uncle said, setting down his coffee with visible unease. "That you're planning to embarrass Camille publicly, after everything I understood to be a genuinely promising match. I arranged that introduction as a courtesy, Enzo. I'd like to understand what's actually happening before this becomes a family embarrassment." "I'd like you to see something first," Enzo said, laying the documentation across his uncle's desk with the same careful, methodical precision his lawyer had used the day before. "Camille's employment history. The shell company's connection to the Volkov family. The timeline matching my own warehouse lease collapse this spring. This isn't a promising match, Uncle. This is a plant, placed specifically to gain access to our family through exactly the kind of business courtesy you extended in good faith." His uncle studied the documentation with growing visible alarm, old confidence in his own judgment finally, uncomfortably cracking under the weight of undeniable, specific evidence. "I had no idea. I vetted her family's standing, their public reputation. I never thought to trace employment history this carefully." "I don't blame you for missing it," Enzo said honestly. "I almost missed it myself at the actual dinner, until someone with nothing to gain pointed out one detail I never would have noticed on my own. The waitress," his uncle said slowly, working through the implication. "The one you've apparently been meeting with since. The one who noticed something true when everyone else in that restaurant, myself included, was too distracted to notice anything at all," Enzo confirmed. "I need your support at Saturday's event, Uncle. Not to embarrass Camille publicly for its own sake. To end a scheme that's been operating against this family since spring, using exactly the kind of trust you extended without hesitation." His uncle sat with the documentation for a long moment, old embarrassment at having been so easily deceived warring against genuine, mounting resolve. "You'll have my support," he said finally. "I'd like to be standing beside you when you present this." I extended the introduction. "I should be the one who helps correct it." Enzo left the estate with considerably more than he'd arrived seeking, not just his uncle's support but genuine family-wide legitimacy for whatever confrontation Saturday's event would require. He called Sofia that evening and the plan was finally fully assembled. "We have everything," he said. "The employment records, the shell company documentation, the bank trail connecting it all to the Volkovs. My uncle's standing with me now, not against me. Saturday we end this properly, in front of the exact witnesses Camille arranged to lock in her narrative." "What do you need from me?" Sofia asked, the old wariness of their first uncertain phone call now fully replaced by something steadier, more genuinely invested in how this actually ended. "Nothing dangerous," Enzo said. "I need you there if you're willing. Not hidden away. Present, the way you should have been credited from the beginning, for noticing what nobody else in that restaurant thought to notice." Sofia considered the invitation, an old instinct to stay carefully invisible, warring against something she'd been slowly, deliberately unlearning across the past 2 weeks. "I'll be there," she said finally. "I think I'd actually like to watch this end, rather than just hearing about it secondhand." Saturday's engagement event unfolded in a private garden Camille had chosen with obvious, careful attention to photographic backdrop, string lights and white florals arranged for exactly the kind of romantic imagery that would anchor whatever narrative she'd planned to lock into place before anyone thought to question it. Enzo arrived with his uncle beside him, the documentation carried in a simple folder that carried none of the drama the moment actually deserved, and found Camille holding court near the garden's center, photographers already positioned, family members from both sides gathered as exactly the witnesses she'd counted on. "You came," Camille said, crossing toward him with practiced warmth, though something wary moved behind her carefully maintained composure at the sight of his uncle's presence beside him. "I came to end this properly," Enzo said, his voice carrying enough weight that nearby conversations began, one by one, to quiet in response. "In front of the same people you arranged to witness our engagement, I think they deserve to witness something considerably more true instead." He opened the folder, laying the documentation across a nearby table with the same careful, methodical precision that had defined every step of the investigation. Camille Voss worked the hostess stand at Lucien's for 8 months, employed under a shell company registered through 2 layers of holding structure that traces directly back to the Volkov family, my family's closest rivals. She left that position the same week my warehouse lease negotiations collapsed under pressure nobody could previously explain. The timing isn't a coincidence. It's documentation. The garden's quiet conversations fell into genuine, startled silence, family members from both sides leaning in to study the paperwork with growing, visible alarm. Camille's composure, already thin from the moment Enzo's uncle had appeared beside him rather than against him, finally fully cracked. "This is fabricated," she said, though her voice carried none of the confident denial genuine innocence might have offered. "You're humiliating me in front of everyone, based on paperwork you've clearly manufactured to avoid honoring a genuine commitment." "The bank records aren't manufactured," Enzo's lawyer said, stepping forward with the final piece of documentation. "Direct payments from Volkov-controlled accounts to the shell company employing you, dated precisely across your entire employment period. This isn't speculation, Ms. Voss. This is a documented financial trail." Camille's father, present among the gathered witnesses, went visibly pale at the confirmation, the specific, exhausted recognition of a man watching his daughter's scheme collapse in front of exactly the audience she'd arranged to witness its success instead. "I want to be clear," Enzo said, addressing the wider garden now, his voice carrying the same controlled, focused authority he'd used with Marcus Castellane's counterpart in situations considerably more dangerous than this one. "This engagement was never real. It was leverage built to gain access to my family through a business courtesy my uncle extended in good faith. I'm not interested in further scandal beyond what's already necessary to end this cleanly. I am interested in every person in this garden understanding exactly what actually happened here, rather than whatever story might have circulated afterward if I'd simply refused to attend." Camille's engineered engagement collapsed in the same public arena she'd built it in, her carefully constructed narrative unable to survive documentation too thorough and too specific to argue against. She left the garden within minutes, her father trailing behind her with the particular hollow urgency of a man calculating how much further damage remained to be contained. Sofia watched from the garden's edge, present exactly as Enzo had promised, no longer hidden, no longer simply the waitress who'd noticed one useful detail. Enzo crossed toward her once the confrontation fully settled, something genuinely grateful and considerably warmer than professional gratitude moving behind his exhausted, focused expression. "It's over," he said, the external conflict resolved completely, decisively, in front of witnesses who would carry the true story forward rather than whatever fabrication Camille had originally planned. "It's over," Sofia agreed, testing the sentence for truth the same careful way she tested every claim across the past 2 weeks. The Blue Plate diner smelled like coffee and fried onions on an ordinary Tuesday morning 3 weeks later, and Sofia worked her section with the same practiced, unhurried rhythm she'd maintained for 5 years, though something about the rhythm felt different now, steadier in a way she hadn't quite named yet. The bell above the door announced a familiar arrival, and Sofia looked up to find Enzo Marchetti settling into the same corner booth where this entire story had first begun, dressed considerably more casually than she'd ever seen him, studying the laminated menu with genuine, uncertain attention. "You don't have to eat here," she said, approaching with her notepad out of habit rather than genuine need. "I'm guessing you've got considerably better options available to you." "I wanted to," Enzo said, an easy warmth in his voice that carried none of his earlier, careful authority. "Though I'll admit I don't actually know what half of this menu is describing." "Get the Tuesday special," Sofia said, unable to fully suppress a small, genuine smile. "It's the only thing that's reliably good here on a Tuesday." He ordered it, and something about watching a man who'd once calmly dismantled a criminal scheme in front of an entire garden full of witnesses now struggling to correctly pronounce gyro, made Sofia's smile widen despite herself. "I have an actual reason for coming," Enzo admitted once she'd delivered his coffee. "Beyond just wanting to see you again." "I figured," Sofia said, settling into the booth across from him despite her shift technically not permitting it, an unspoken rule she decided in this particular case was worth briefly ignoring. "You mentioned that first night at the diner an accounting degree you've been working on the side," Enzo said. "I've been thinking about it since. I have an opening on my organization's financial oversight team. Legitimate work, considerably more visible than anything you're doing here, Exactly the kind of work that degree was actually built for. Sofia sat with the offer for a long moment, old caution surfacing briefly despite the genuine warmth of the gesture. I don't want this to feel like a transaction, she said slowly. Like you're paying me back for one sentence at a dinner table, dressed up as a job offer. It's not a transaction, Enzo said, meeting her eyes with the same steady, unguarded honesty he'd shown her across the entire investigation. You noticed a detail nobody else in that restaurant thought to notice. You kept noticing details throughout this entire ordeal, careful and precise, exactly the skill set I actually need on a team that catches problems before they become crises. I'm not offering you charity, Sofia. I'm offering you work that actually uses what you're capable of, instead of leaving it half-finished on the side of a diner shift. Sofia studied him, the accumulated weight of the past 3 weeks settling into something considerably steadier than the wary uncertainty of their first unlikely phone call. I'll think about it, she said, testing the offer the way she'd learned to test everything important in her life. Properly. Not rushing into it just because it sounds good over coffee. That's fair, Enzo said, genuine respect rather than impatience in his voice. Take whatever time you need. She thought about it for 11 days. Weighing the careful, hard-won stability of her diner life against the specific, unfamiliar possibility of finally being seen for more than what people assumed a waitress's ambitions could reasonably extend to. She said yes on a Wednesday afternoon, calling the number on the business card she'd never actually thrown away. Months later, sitting across from Enzo at a different table entirely, his office, papers spread between them instead of diner menus, the blind date and Camille Voss long since faded into the specific, distant memory of a story that had started with one honest sentence and ended somewhere neither of them had originally planned. Sofia understood that the version of herself who'd spent 5 years staying carefully unremarkable had finally, deliberately built something considerably more visible. In its place. You're staring, Enzo said, looking up from the reports between them. I'm just thinking about how this actually started, Sofia said, an easy warmth in her voice that carried none of her old, careful invisibility. One sentence delivered like small talk because I couldn't stand watching someone get played by a story that is obviously convenient. Best small talk I've ever heard, Enzo said, and Sofia laughed, genuine and unguarded, in a way 5 years of careful diner composure had never once fully allowed her to. If you noticed something true that wasn't actually your business to mention, would you have the courage to say it anyway? Or does real change sometimes begin exactly the way Sofia's did, with one honest sentence nobody asked you to speak?